It is March the 13th, Thursday, 2025, and I am Dr. Grantham Taylor Hughes for my show, The Grantham Taylor Hughes Show, with my guest host, Lena Suzanne. Hi, Lena.
Hello, Grantham. How are you?
I'm fine. See, you have to appreciate I'm known for messing up the introductions. So we used to leave them after I'd mess them up, and then I'd get through them years ago. I say, "Hey, I made it through this time." See, so editorializing about the introduction can be funny. And we want to put a little jocularity into our calls. Why not? I mean, we don't take ourselves that seriously, even though we have this great truth. So anyway, we want to talk today. We touched on a little bit in previous videos about what is known as the birthright. So everybody knows what the birthright is, but they know the term, but they don't know what it is. And so I'm going to go through it in detail about what the birthright is. We know that. All right, so I had said that I'm a theist on that I believe in God, all right, but I don't really get into much esoteric discussions. But I think that each individual is an eternal soul. So that the atheists will not agree with that. They think when you pass away that you're nothing. And there's some truth to that in terms of Eastern philosophy. But see, there has to be a graduality to get to that. See, you can't just jump into nothingness and expect to deal with it. All right, now the birthright issue is I think with this soul in the East they say it's a minimum of 10,000 sons of power. So it's a big power according to lore, according to ancient philosophy. And I got this from my Tibetan Lama teachers. Now I agreed with a lot of what they say, but I'm not a Tibetan Lama. Just for the record, I didn't become a Lama, and but I did take their knowledge. I mean, why not? But it doesn't mean you have to join. You can get knowledge from anywhere. I mean, they have a lot of philosophies and teachings around the world. Doesn't mean necessarily you join up. So, but I do revere their information because you got to have some people that have expertise, and I do agree with that. So, in reference to the birth canal, that 10,000 sons of power that comes through the birth canal, we'll just call it that. I believe that the essence of man is a very powerful being there, even though I don't know much about it. But anyway, so what I'm saying is when that's born, I called it the grand compromise. That means that this essence, this big essence, had to compromise itself to come into this little body, right? So you see, there was a deserving labor that took place, just like when a woman goes to have a baby, it's known as labor, right? She goes into labor, and there's a labor on both sides. The baby's laboriously trying to get through the birth canal, and then once it does, it breaks free into the air, and that all that labor should be paid for. See, what happens when people go to work? They go to work for an employer, and they get paid as an employee, right? You get paid money for your work. Excuse me. And in reference to that birth, at that point, that labor should be paid for. So how do we pay the baby? Well, that means we give their food, shelter, and clothing as a birthright. That's your birthright, is food, shelter, and clothing to be paid for the birth labor. So you can't hear this anywhere else. Years ago, I did research on the birthright. I was talking to a lot of professionals, lawyers, and teachers, uh, and all these doctorates and what have you, and they were telling me all sorts of rationalizations and giving me slugs of documents and papers to read up on it. Nobody got to the heart of the matter, and so I had to go to the Far East to get the answers to. So the Tibetan Lamas taught me this information. See, so you got to appreciate that when we get down to the truth of the birthright, it's very interesting, isn't it? Don't you think so, Lena? It's a very interesting thing, the
hmm
grand compromise. Don't you agree?
I do agree, yes. And it's interesting how we call it labour in the workplace.
Yes.
And yeah.
Mhm. Right. And the labor should be paid for. We don't do any work without getting paid, right? And
hmm
that's the way it was in ancient times. It was the labor or the compromise of this essence coming through and all this labor they did, and it should be paid for. So at higher times, like in the golden age, we recognize this birth and we freely give the food, shelter, and clothing to them in indirect trade. Indirect trade would be a an economy without the medium of exchange. Excuse me. When there's no money in the system, that's called indirect trade. And indirect trade can be done even today if you just get rid of the money. Of course, the banking industry is not going to stand for that, so it's not going to happen anytime soon. But if we got rid of that, then we reduce the starvation rate down to about 5% instead of 66 and two-thirds percent right now. We have 2 billion people that are properly fed and 6 billion people that are starving to death. 6 to 7 billion people are starving to death. You can appreciate how awful that is. Isn't that terrible?
Hmm.
You see
Yeah.
what I mean? We're not really doing anything about it.
So,
Except, yes, go ahead.
was there ever a time in history, Grantham, where it was recognised that where the birthright was recognised, the right to have free shelter, clothing, and food?
Correct.
Was
Yeah,
that
food.
recognised as once upon a time, or?
I think in it more of a golden era. It's like we're in an iron age and golden era, golden age. It's recognized then. We get into what is known as a knowingness arena, and we know these things, just like what I'm talking about. It's just a knowingness within. We know this is true because it feels right, and you just it connects to our, as I call it, the knowingness arena. See, the knowingness arena is more of a golden time. Right now, we're not in a knowingness arena except in the mind stuff. Excuse me, like the inner side, the mind stuff. There's a knowingness there. So we touch on that in our videos. We touch on the knowingness within, and that's where this era takes place in the proper recognition of the birthright. But at least see, we've elucidated on the fact of what the birthright is. You can't go anywhere else. I tried. I tried to go. This is the only forum that will talk about the specificity of the proper definition of the birthright. You can't go anywhere else and get it. It's
Mm.
impossible. I challenge people to go out there and get the information we talk about in our videos. I challenge people to do that. They just cannot do that. You have to come here. I know that sounds audacious sometimes, but somebody has to have audacity.
So, Grantham, how do we get do we need to get to a point where masses of people have this knowingness of the birthright
Well,
before
yeah,
before
go ahead. I'm
those,
sorry.
before those 6 to 7 billion starving people can be fed properly?
Well, I think that the simplicity of indirect trade could take place even without recognition of the birthright. But the problem is when you're talking about money and you're talking about big entities in terms of banking, excuse me, it's just like my family are the biggest bankers in the world, and I appeal to them all the time about things. I'm kind of what they call a black sheep of the family because of my viewpoints sometimes. But that's okay. It doesn't really matter. They understand, but we're not at an era where it can break free of it. See, we're in a difficult time called the Iron Age right now. So it makes things difficult. Just like we go through technical difficulties and just the physical difficulties and the things we go through daily, it cannot be necessarily, it's not necessarily pleasant experience. So we try to push forward. Like I said earlier, I pushed forward to be a public speaker because I knew I needed to do it and I needed to get over my self-consciousness. So when we get over self-consciousness, then we start to get into the knowingness area. But then you have to talk to people like us so you can uh, evacuate about the information that you have to get to people that are truly going to listen to you. Because I am a very good listener, albeit I'm a pretty good speaker. I'm also listening attentively too, because we need to do that to allow people to get to their knowingness arena. All we need to do is learn how to have decent conversations. That's all. We're not doing that. We're not spending the time. We're slaves of time and not masters of time. We got to become masters of time, and it's very difficult to be master of time in a international labor camp. People are working 8 to 10 hours a day and more, and they don't really have time for a conversation. They're always thinking, well, education and knowledge came in school. I went through school. I don't really need to be educated anymore. but that's just not true because we're forever learning things and experiencing things. As I say, it's better to experience than to learn because we're always learning something. It doesn't mean we don't learn, but we're always learning things. It means we never knew anything. So getting to the knowingness arena is just getting out of the way of people, allowing them their space to find themselves and their own realization. Like I was self-realized when I was 21, dealing with my Tibetan teachers, and that's because I made a connection in my speech. I'm able to do that, but everybody can, if given proper time to elucidate or to communicate about what they're thinking about. See, what you're thinking about can be articulated, and there needs to be a forum for that, and we're creating that forum here today. That's the forum that I'm creating so that people can come to the naked public square. There was a book by Pastor Newhouse, who was a contemporary or friend of William F. Buckley. He wrote a book back in the day called The Naked Public Square, and he was talking about coming to the public square and giving your opinions freely, but people don't do that because they're nervous wrecks. Again, they don't want to do public speaking because self-consciousness is what we have in an immature society in the West. We're immature as opposed to the Far East. My Tibetan teachers were so bright because they're from the ancient culture. It's a very old culture. They use their sight, they use their thinking, they use their articulation. Whereas in the West, we're blunted, so to speak. We're but it's not really a conscious blunting, so to speak, or a condemnation of our being. It's really, as I say, it's misfeasance, mostly making mistakes. Anyway, so um, yeah, I can continue on until I fall asleep. So we don't. Well, I can do that, I suppose, but we only have a half hour to do it. So I can fall asleep in 2 minutes. That man has narcolepsy. Fall
Can,
asleep in the middle of a sentence. A narcolepsy.
can you?
Anyway, did that simulate any questions that I was just talking about, or commentaries, or
It would
a
be
saker?
it would be interesting to hear more about how you came to be in Tibet and your Tibetan teachers.
Well, I spent 3 years in Tibet, and and it was very enlightening. Let's put it that way. It's just the people there are very warm, and they use their eyesight. When I got off the plane, everybody's looking at each other. They use their eyes. It's very different than the West, where they shy away. They don't use eye contact. But in India, everybody uses eye contact. So it's actually a good experience. Even that of itself is to learn about the idea of your eyes are for what? To observe and see, right?
Hmm. So what's
To
the
be
cause?
Yes, go ahead.
So what's the cause of that difference between the East and West in terms of how?
Immaturity. Just it's not an old culture. I mean, America's only about 200-year-old entity, and England's a couple thousand years. But when you're talking about the Far East being millions of years, you can see there's a difference in maturity level. Just time. Over time, people who excuse me will relax and realize you can look around and see people. When the information that we're giving out is that eyes are not windows of the soul, we're mirrors of the soul, and we're the creators of our fellow beings. When that gets around into the nomenclature, people will relax a little bit about observation. It's just immaturity, time. Time heals all, as they say. So I think we need maybe a couple hundred more years in the West to be a little bit more mature culture. And that's it, just immaturity as a culture.
Uh, and how do you mean that we're the creators of our fellow human beings?
Well, I mean, that's kind of edgy. Well, but I understand that because as I said, we were talking about the yantra work, and we were talking about our eyes create our empire because you're focusing your attention. Remember, we said we're this big power, okay? So that I can get off the hook with that, not getting esoteric because I don't really know anything about that. But the exoteric side of it is that if when we're born and we have our eyes open. And if this essence is really huge like it is, then that means that we're drawing things to us. Well, when we talked about the yantra in the last video, when we center our eyesight on a point, a singular point in front of us, then we draw our wherewithal to us. People that are very successful in this world have used the skill either unconsciously or consciously, where they're looking in the middle with their eyesight. We're already looking in the middle anyway to a certain degree because we're in a convergent world. And we can get in divergency and convergency, which is very important because for you to see me, you've converged 10% from behind yourself. That's 360 degree. We call it MDC, Macy Dust concept. Anyway, so you're in the middle of a water droplet. So what you do to see one singular picture in front of you, you've got to superimpose two pictures because you have two eyes. See, your two eyes means that you are superimposing one picture in front of you. See, that's called convergency. That comes from a book, Photo Reading by Dr. Peter Seeley. He was him and a few other people created there was a affirmation neurolinguistic programming. They created neurolinguistic programming after he wrote the book, The Photo Reading. Photo reading is still out there. That means you can read 300,000 words a minute by studying photo reading. Photo reading is a difficult book, though. I could write a pamphlet, a couple page pamphlet, and simplify the whole thing. But in that book, he was teaching people how to photo read that your eyes are really a camera, and you need to focus the eyes in the middle, and then you can you can use when you do that, you can do a peripheral reading. It's called, you diverge the eyesight, and then what happens that you can see both pages as a camera. You take a picture of it and store it in your mind, and you can retrieve that at any particular time. So that's called photo reading. And photo reading really helps our creativity process of our focus. It's a problem of focus, Alina. Our people are scattered with their attention. So if they attenuate their attention, then they bring everything to us, you see, to them. And we do it to bring it to us. You see, so that's how the creation takes place because we're creating with all this power that we have our world around us. Now, you don't have to get nervous about it because people just do it naturally anyway. As we speak, people are creating their world, but they're not really aware of it. So we bring back this certain awareness of the exoteric life, which is very important. The existence life needs a lot of answers to it because people just don't have proper answers right now, and we can bring a lot of information to them, a lot of knowledge that they didn't have before. But it's something they have within them, in their own minds. We're talking about these things, you see, and they get excited about what we talk about because that's what people are thinking about. We address what's being thought because I make these connections and conclusions just so you do too, and that's why people really like what we're doing.
Maybe we could go into the convergence divergence a bit more. So, you were saying that we have to converge in order to make sense of the world. We're
Oh, we
converging
converge.
on eyesight.
Yeah, go ahead.
Uh,
Yeah,
but
please go ahead.
is
Go
there
ahead.
any benefit to divergence?
Well,
It's not
yes,
something we do often in our
mm,
daily life because
that's interesting.
but we can.
Well, yeah, when you know about it, people are nervous about divergence because it took thousands of years to get convergence. See, because in the beginning we saw two pictures because they have two eyes. You look straight ahead, you see two eyes. But what happens? Well, when you see two pictures, you're going to step into a picture either to the left or to the right. And preferably, you should step into the one on the right because it's a positive polarity. The left side is the negative polarity because it's left and right. We have to designate polarities of positive and negative. Now, negative doesn't necessarily mean evil. It's not really a value judgment of good and evil. It's just the electronics of polarity of bringing a single focus or resonance to the traveling of electricity. However, in terms of convergency, the idea is to be able to see one world and stop getting a psychotic break of stepping into one world or the left and right side and trying to make a decision on which way to go. So that was a problem in ancient times because people were just befuddled. They didn't know how to make the decision on going to right or left, so they didn't make a decision. They sat there like adult, not knowing what to do. So a long time ago, the uh, the giants of the time, mental giants, the smart people, divined the fact that they needed to converge this divergency in front of them because there was too much confusion on where to go. So what happens is they converge the eyesight 10 degrees into one picture in front of you. Now you can see how that can be somewhat complex. How did they do that? Well, they were in two worlds and they sort of forced it into one, into focusing the eye in the center. Like when you focus your eyes in the center, it draws the picture in the 10% from behind you because we're in a 360-degree bubble right now, and that 10% convergency will create the one world in front of us. It's just mathematics. And it's a methodology of divergence and convergence, which I call omnivergence. And I'm going to create an institute called the Omnivergence Institute with 26 divisions. It's the new Silicon Valley. I call it the Neo Silicon Valley because periodically they create these great plantations or templates for proper technology. So the convergent, yes, go ahead, please.
So, are people able to do this divergence in practice? And what would be the point? Is there any benefit in it?
Yes, well, the yantra will help for learn how to do divergency. See, when you look at the eyes in the center, the eyes are trying to separate because the natural state is to see two pictures in front of you. That's your natural state. The unnatural state is convergency into a singular picture in front of you. This is not a natural state we're in right now. You and I looking at each other. The natural state would be two pictures in divergency. But because there's confusion with that, the convergency is what we want to be in, so we're in one world. We're dealing with one world, not two worlds, which just causes a befuddlement. So, so the benefit is to have a normal life in convergency, because you can't have a normal life when there's two pictures and always deciding which way to go. You see, so what we do is we combine the positive and negative worlds into one, and that's the reason why there's a lot of difficulty in our world because there's negativity in the world too as well and because of the convergency. But the convergency is necessary in order to have stabilization in our moving about our chess piece in the physical world. See, that's stabilizing convergency, but it's unstable because there's negativity in it. So we learn how to balance ourselves in the physical world and to ward off negativity or to use negativity. We learned a couple of years ago we want to utilize our negativity in the yantra because it creates the outer world and the convergent world has negative and positive polarities. You have dark and light. Like I'm looking at you, and you have your dark sweater on, your dark hair, and behind you there's a white wall, right? And that's a contrast. To be able to see you, you have to have the lightest lights and the darkest darks in art that's called chiaroscuro. You have the white light and the dark pitch dark creates a contrast. Now the colors are in between that. The colors are the prism in between that, and the proof is when it rains and there's sunlight shining through the raindrops. What happens on the other side? Well, a rainbow, right?
Mhm.
So where does the rainbow come from? Well, it comes from the water droplet because there's a prism of colors within the water droplet. In the water droplet, there's a chiaroscuro from the whitest white, the darkest dark, and there's a prism of colors in between there. You see, it's kind of a grand mystery of how the clarity of a water droplet will have all colors, but it does. See, and you hear that first here on the Grantham Taylor Hughes show. Nobody has this information but me. Why is it? I don't know. I just have that information because I've done a lot of discovery and and research. I've done lots of research in my life to get into nuances. I get in down to the nuances. They call it useless information, but the useful information of divergence is the idea of being able to travel too in divergency. Because remember, when we back to the old divergency, you're either stepping into the right side or the left side. So what does that mean? Well, you're moving. See, there's movement in there. So ironically, we should be able to do both convergency and divergency, which is omnivergence. We eliminated a skill. We eliminated divergency when we converged in ancient times, but we should have that dynamic. We should be able to use both of them. It's like our native language and our auxiliary country language. We can have that. We can have both. See, so what they did is that because they got frightened about the divergency, they stopped using it. And even today, when we converge and we talk about divergency, they're afraid they couldn't get back to the convergency because it took so long to get there in the first place. But
Mhm.
time is not an issue. We got to get rid of the idea of time, and we're in the eternal present, which Eckhart Tolle talks about. He talks about the eternal now, which I really appreciate that. But what is in the eternal now? I talk about what's in the eternal now is a convergency. Who's talking about this? Peter Scheele was talking about, I think it's pronounced Sheely. He was talking about divergency and convergency in his little book, but photo reading's hard to decipher because it's kind of like a nutty professor. I had to read it several times to get what he was talking about. Excuse me.
So, Grantham, are there people who can actually do this divergency and choose which portal, left or right, they step into, and then what happens?
Well, I met two gentlemen, and they lived on opposite ends of the country, and both had these experience of being in an emotional state, a fearful state, and they closed their eyes, and they when they opened their eyes, they're about 100 yards ahead of themselves. You see, so they asked me if I could explain what that was. I said it was a divergency and convergency, but it frightened them because they didn't really understand what I was talking about. But they actually did that. So I've talked to people that actually had that experience. Now I haven't had that experience of doing the divergency and stepping in the right or left side and move forward. But I know people that have. So I respect that. And these people were concerned about it. They weren't really lying about it. They were concerned about an experience that they had had. But again, I haven't had the experience, but I'm aware of the experience and I comprehend the experience. I would like to. I've tried to do the divergency and trap moving into the right or left side. I think it was very important. Theoretically, I think if you do divergence convergence and you have a vision board or you have an idea of your life the way you want it, that it will happen in your own creation. Otherwise, you stay with the yantra because the yantra does work in terms of bringing you an empire. At the same time, to do it your own self, you can learn how to do divergence, convergence, and manifest it yourself, the conscious power. But see that the power frightens people. Even the word power, people get nervous about it. Because I would always talk about power versus love, and people get really nervous about it. They like the idea of love, but then I'm saying, well, but you can't love everybody because you're going to get a big stick from somebody. When you try to love the world, you see what happens to you know it's that's why people stay in the neutral state. Like a normal state is a neutrality, and so therefore the idea of the divergence is valuable in terms of travel, but it's also we're really trying to get into the omnivergence. These people that I'm trying to find those, I don't know where those gentlemen are any longer, but they were nervous about it anyway. They weren't probably workable subjects with the whole thing. So I am trying to find somebody that can actually do the divergence because when you realize the divergence, it means where you are right now completely separates the two worlds. Or like when we talk about the yantra spinning and turning into light, well, that's the same thing. That would make you nervous that if everything in front of you exoterically turned into homogeneous light, right? See, that makes people very nervous about that. Or if you hadn't been drinking and the world in front of you starts spinning, because you know they say when you close your eyes and you're inebriated, you get the spins. You've probably heard that. I've got the spins.
Mhm.
Well, how drunk are you? Very drunk. So that's where the spins come from, because we're in a spinning world. There's a reality to the spins.
So, so if there was someone who could do this divergence, see the two portals, is it almost like two different paths in life, like two different realities,
Like two different parts of your life, you're saying?
two different paths,
Oh, two
right?
different paths.
Yeah, or
Well,
two.
it's the same thing. It's just like what we're seeing right now in convergence. We're seeing one world, and you can walk through it. You can move around your physical body, In divergence, you can do the same thing, but then see what happens when you don't have convergence. Then when you step into a portal, two portals open up again. See, so you're always going left or right and constantly making a decision on the location you're in. You see, so that became a befuddlement for people over a long period of time. So they had to teach convergence and get to convergence to be in one world instead of being in two worlds all the time. You see, that there used to be confusion because you're always making a decision on which side you wanted to go in, or you didn't make a decision at all and you were staying in the middle of being adult. See, adult meaning a dull person or not doing anything. Indolence, we weren't doing anything. So it created inertia within people because they just gave up. So they were wondering, what do we do, fix this inertia within people? Because they stopped making decisions right or left all the time, and they just got in the middle and were in a state of no motion. Inertia has two things. You're going so fast you can't stop, or you're going too slow that you completely cease. That's inertia. But usually when they teach inertia, they talk about a force acting on something that make it move. But that's not the long answer to the word inertia. Right. Did you want to get in there? Or did you have a question? Well,
Um,
what's our time look like?
well, I think it's pretty much time now. But
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
yeah, it's I haven't got my head around divergence. I'm sure it's something we can come back to another time.
Absolutely. We'll do it next time.
Yeah, that's great. So thank you very much, Grantham, for
You're
today.
welcome. Have a great day. Thank you, Nina.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. All righty.
And for anyone listening, if you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe to this channel, and share it with your friends. Bye bye.